Hello and welcome. So today we're going to tackle a word you hear all the time, especially in academic circles, discourse. But what does it actually mean? We're going to break down Michel Foucault's incredibly powerful idea and see how it, well, kind of secretly shapes our entire reality. So, have you ever heard that word, discourse, and just sort of nodded along even though you weren't totally sure what it meant? Yeah, you are definitely not alone. It can feel like one of those super academic, slippery terms that's just hard to get a grip on. But hey, you're in the right place because we're about to make it all make sense.
All right, let's just dive right in. Our guide on this little journey is the French philosopher Michel Foucault. And honestly, this guy completely changed how we think about the relationship between knowledge and power.
And you know, part of the reason it's so confusing, even Foucault himself used the term in a few different ways, sometimes in ways that even seem to contradict each other. So to really get our heads around it, we've got to break it down, step by step. So, Foucault basically gives us three main ways to think about discourse. We're going to start with the biggest, broadest meaning, and then zoom in on the one that was really the most important for his work.
Okay, so at its broadest, level one, discourse is just everything. Everything ever said, everything ever written. That's it. Simple enough. Then for level two, it can mean specific collections of statements, like what we'd call the discourse of medicine, for example. But, and this is the big one, the third meaning, the one Foucault was obsessed with, is discourse as the set of unwritten rules, the very system that controls what can be said in the first place.
Let me give you a really concrete example. Think about writing an essay for university class. No one hands you a perfect, official rule book, do they? But you learn pretty fast what's expected. The structure, the formal tone, how to cite your sources. You learn to work inside the discourse of academic writing. That is the kind of invisible system Foucault is talking about. So if discourse is a system of rules, what are these rules actually doing? Well, they're all about control. They don't just, let statements happen. They actively select, organize, and circulate some ideas while building a big fence to keep other ideas out. And right here in Foucault's own words, you can see that engine at work. He's saying discourse isn't some kind of free-for-all. Nope, it's a managed system. It's a way to control what he saw as the inherent powers and dangers of just letting anyone say anything. So how does this control actually work? Well, Foucault breaks it down into two main types of operations. You've got external exclusions, which are basically about fencing things out, and then you have internal procedures, which are about organizing everything that's already inside the fence. Let's take a quick look at what these actually are. Okay, first up, the external rules, the ones that build that fence. You've got prohibition, which makes certain topics taboo and hard to talk about. You have the division between what's considered mad versus what's sane, which lets us just write off what certain people say is nonsense. And then there's the big one, the power to decide what's true versus false, which usually comes from official institutions and designated experts. Then, once you're inside the fence, these internal rules start organizing everything. There's commentary, which is basically deciding that some texts are so important we need to talk about them forever. There's the idea of the author, which we use to lump a bunch of different works together under one name. Then you have academic disciplines, which draw these really strict lines about what counts as, say, sociology versus psychology. And finally, something Foucault called rarefication, which is a fancy way of saying we limit who is even considered qualified to speak. I mean, think about it. Who gets to stand at the podium and give the lecture, and who has to sit quietly and just listen? Okay, so why should we care about all these rules? I mean, what's the big deal? Well, it's because they aren't just abstract little concepts. They have a massive, real-world impact on how power functions and, believe it or not, on how we even see reality itself. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Isn't this just another word for ideology? And that's a great question, but for Foucault, there's a really key difference. See, we usually think of ideology as this totally negative thing, right? Like a set of false beliefs that get pushed on people. But discourse is more complicated. It's more like a battlefield. It's a place where power is used, for sure, but it's also the place where power can be challenged and resisted. This quote from his book, The History of Sexuality, just hits the nail on the head. Discourse isn't just a tool for oppression, it's the very ground on which resistance can grow. It's the starting point for fighting back. And this brings us to probably the most important takeaway of all. Foucault is arguing that discourse isn't like a mirror that just reflects reality as it is. No, it's more like a lens that actively builds the reality that we see. It doesn't just describe our world, it organizes how we're even allowed to think about it. Let's use an amazing example to make this super clear. Imagine an earthquake. The ground shakes, buildings might fall. This is a real, physical thing that happens. It exists whether we talk about it or not, right? It's outside of discourse. Okay, but what does that earthquake mean? Well, that depends entirely on the discourse you're operating in. If you're in a scientific discourse, it's a geological event caused by tectonic plates. But if you're in a religious discourse, it could be seen as an expression of God's anger. It's the exact same physical event, but which reality is the reality? See, for Foucault, both meanings are constructed by their discourse. This quote from Laclau and Mouffe puts it perfectly. Foucault isn't saying that rocks and trees and earthquakes aren't real. Of course they are. What he's saying is that the only way we can make sense of them, the only way these things become meaningful to us, is through the framework of discourse. So why does any of this really matter to you, to us? Because once you understand discourse, you get this powerful new lens, a whole new way to look at your own world. Foucault was really blunt about it. He actually calls discourse a violence which we do to things. Now, that's a shocking word, violence, but it really drives his point home. Creating knowledge isn't some passive act of just discovering what's already there. It's an active, forceful practice of imposing our order on a very messy world. So in the end, Foucault's whole concept of discourse is really a tool. It's a tool for critical thinking. It lets us take a step back and actually analyze the systems of knowledge that we just take for granted every single day. It helps us ask, wait a minute, why is this considered true? Whose voice are we hearing, and whose voice is being completely ignored? And what are the unwritten rules that are making it all happen? And that's the question I really want to leave you with. In your job, in your family, in the news you watch, what are the invisible rules of discourse that are at play? What do those rules allow you to see and say? And maybe more importantly, what do they hide from you? It's something to think about. Thanks so much for tuning in.